the HLP Global AOR, and a quick update from myself. And also, we're going to have a second part where we're going to have presentations from counter presentations, so one from Iraq, one from Ethiopia, and one from Nigeria. These presentations will focus on the theme of the session, which is what is secure enough tenure, right? Which is something we've been discussing this past year quite a lot. And then the third part of the session will be questions and answers. So please, I urge you to just take notes on your questions or write on the chat, and then at the end of the session, we'll take up the questions. So my name is Iberia Lopez. I'm the HLP advisor to the Global Shelter Cluster. I'll give an update on our activities since the last update last year at the 2019 Global Shelter Cluster Annual Forum. But for now, we will start with a quick update from Jim Robinson, who is the HLP AOR lead. Jim, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, Ibire. Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Just checking you can hear me. Is that okay? Great. Okay, yes. Thanks. Sorry. So thank you very much for having me here and able to give a quick update on the HLP AOR. I'm just going to share my screen. I've had a couple of things just to share with you, and let me just see. There we go. Okay, so yeah, I mean, in many ways, 2020 was a very different year than probably a lot of us expected, and for the HLP AOR, this was no different. So firstly, we had to deal with COVID-19 as an unexpected crisis that affected a lot of our work in many ways. And in response to COVID, the HLP AOR has been actively contributing to protection, cluster coordination, advocacy and messaging, as well as working closely with the shelter cluster, with Ibire and others to develop some products with consistent messaging across the AOR and the shelter cluster. So some of these activities included the launch of living guidance document on HLP can you? Is that someone saying they can't hear? Is that okay? Can you hear me okay? I'm just checking. Okay, good. I'll carry on. So one of the responses to COVID-19 was to launch a living guidance document on HLP and COVID-19, obviously with the housing and shelter and land being a key part of responses across the world. So that living document is still live on the website. I'm going to post links in the chat shortly, and that looks at advocacy issues, mapping of laws, policies and decrees around securing HLP rights, due diligence tools, that kind of things. And it's something that we want people to contribute to and draw from. So please do have a look at that. There's resources on there as well. The HLP AOR also produced with its membership a model decree edict to secure tenure during COVID-19. So one of the pieces where it was able to support was to hear from the Somalia example, where moratoria have been able to play a key role in securing the tenure of renters and occupants during the COVID-19 pandemic. So you may well have heard about this or read about it, that the HLP working group in Somalia were able to sort of carry out some advocacy and within the city of Baidoa and have a moratorium passed that sort of paused evictions for some 5,600 ITPs, and that's been a successful sort of interim measure, but of course what the longer term results will be remain to be seen. Also, as part of the response to COVID, the HLP AOR developed and launched an evictions and relocation response toolbox, which you can see on the screen. Sadly, this looks like it will be increasingly relevant in the coming months. And please do access this, and you can see some of the parts of it there. And I would welcome you to comment on what is useful, what what has been helpful, where there could be improvements, are there gaps, are there things that you want to see developed and maybe be part of developing as well, please do get in touch. As part of that, we're also developing a standards and criteria for dignified evictions and departure, which is under review. So that's something that, again, is going to be coming out. And if you'd like to have a look at that and make any comments, please do. I think I just want to stress at this point that the HLP AOR, whilst I'm sort of the coordinator and help coordinate within the protection cluster and with shelter colleagues and others, the membership of the AOR is very much yourselves, and many of you on this call will be active in activities that the AOR has been trying to support and work with you. So we encourage you to join in and to contribute as much as you would like, and to suggest things and to get involved. One of the key things the AOR has continued to do in 2020 is develop the relationships in support of colleagues in the field, such as yourselves, working on land and housing. So working with shelter, working with CCCM clusters, relationships that continue to be deepened and at both the global and the field level. The HLP AOR, one of the key things it does is maintain a help desk. So it works with country level groups, subclusters, other HLP practitioners to support in a number of different areas. Some of these have been to support country level groups to establish themselves. So helping with terms of reference and sort of discussing how that might work. So that's been something that's happened in Burkina Faso, Mali, Sudan, and we've been sort of talking a little bit with those in South Sudan as well to support processes there. We've been working to support the adaptation of due diligence frameworks for shelter and emergency projects in Libya, Bangladesh, Iraq, Burkina Faso, to conduct advocacy to prevent evictions in Somalia and Iraq, as well as supporting the development of eviction monitoring systems in Nigeria. There was a support mission plan to Burkina Faso, which had to be adapted due to COVID, and actually the resources were reallocated to support a local consultant with expertise on HLP to develop scoping for the AOR, which has been very, very successful in helping that AOR develop their work plan and really engage with the HLP issues, something that we're looking to replicate in Mali, Yemen and Sudan in the coming months. So the AOR is trying to sort of increase its proactive engagement with country level working groups. It's something we've been working on this last few months, and the subclusters to give them that timely support. And that's been included support around the HNO and the humanitarian program cycle, assessments, reporting and planning phases. And again, if we can help with anything in there, any questions you might have on indicators or just with some help on the analysis around the HLP related things, be that with a shelter cluster, with protection, with whatever you're working on, please do get in touch. I mean, the HLP help desk, it's a resource for you to draw on to we want to provide technical and coordination guidance for teams in the field, and of course there's many of you and your shelter colleagues are part of that as well, so we draw on different expertise from around the world and to provide hopefully the connections and contacts for what you need. Do get in touch. So it might be that we can help with some template documents for examples of specific documents around due diligence, assessments, lease agreements, that kind of thing. So as of 2020, there's I think 19 working groups, task forces and subclusters and AORs working on HLP specifically. A lot of them sit within the protection cluster framing, but many of them also are sitting with the shelter cluster and also some with CCCM as well. And I think this coordination and collaboration is so essential, and it was reflected in the GPC session that we held just at the end of last month, where we had many shelter cluster members both presenting on their work, but also on the panel as well and in attendance. And we looked at, we asked due diligence, what next? What happens when due diligence processes meet the complexity of emergency situations, particularly in the context of, collaboration and coordination between protection, shelter and CCCM colleagues. And it was a great opportunity to sort of gather together, and I'm really hoping that we can keep developing those relationships and the ways that we can work together in the future. So there will be notes on that to follow, and more will be shared in the coming weeks. The OR co-produced 3 webinars with the Land Portal in the last year. So they were based around COVID-19, looking at women's HLP rights in relation to eviction responses during and after COVID, and HLP dimensions of migration, displacement and deurbanisation related to COVID-19. There's links on the website, and they've been in the newsletter as well. One of the key things that the HLP OR wants to be and wants to do, and what we aim to do, is as well as the help desk function and the support to the field and advocacy policy work at the global level, one of the key aims is to be a community of practice for those working on land and housing issues in emergency contexts. We want this to be a space to connect colleagues facing similar challenges, where they can share learning practices, gather together and find ways of forward in response to particular problems. So one of the things we have been developing are ways to get involved. One of these is thematic interest groups. HLB can be something of a catch-all term for many diverse areas of work, and the thematic interest groups, the aim is to allow smaller focus groups to engage on specific themes. So this year we've seen the launch of groups on displaced women's HLP, shelter, camp coordination, camp management, evictions and relocations, as well as the continuation of the HLP assessments group, which culminated actually in the publication of some HLP assessment guidance earlier this year. In the coming year, we're hoping to see active groups on WASH, mine action, emergency infrastructure, relocation, resettlement and returns. And they are opportunities to really gather around particular issues and on an ad hoc basis to discuss and to see ways forward, maybe to develop tools and guidance and sort of act as that community of practice with those who maybe have experience in other contexts or the similar contexts. Now, these groups, of course, depend on you. So on you as practitioners, coordinators, as others. So if you've been worked on these issues or are interested in getting involved, then please do get in touch. I'll post in the chat a link to a very short survey where you can sort of indicate a preference for that. And just in summary, something in 2020, the HLP AOR launch was a monthly newsletter. So at the moment, we've got over 450 subscribers to it, and it's a way to kind of share resources and updates around events, but also around publication of documents, experiences. And again, I want to say, please do feel free to share and contribute and suggest ideas or themes, but also to share maybe work that you've been working on and others that you think people would benefit from learning from, and I can sort of help publicise that through the mailing list. I'll also put a link to I'll be able to contribute to that. And last thing is thinking about the coming year, next year, 2021 and beyond. We're looking at developing the strategy and the work plan. So there will be, we're going to send around a survey to sort of gauge your priorities and your interests if you're as part of the mailing list and the membership. And really keen to get feedback on the year. What's worked well? What would you like to see done differently? Where can the HLP AOR support you and your work more? And yeah, that's where I'll leave it. So essentially, sign up for the newsletter, join thematic interest groups, share resources, contribute to the COVID-19 guidance. It'd be great to have you as part of what we're doing. And just thank you again to Shelter Cluster for being fantastic colleagues. And it's been a real joy to sort of join this role and to work with you. So I'll post some links in the chat now. And that from me is over.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much for this update. Yes, let's all participate. The more we all participate, the more we all have to gain. Let me just very quickly give my updates. It will be very short, much shorter than Jim's, so I can leave some time for the country presentations. So for those who have been following the work of the HLP advisor to the Global Shelter Cluster, our work is based on this model of country deployments. And we were doing between 10 to 12 country deployments per year. And as you can see from this update, from the last update from the last year, we've done 3 deployments. So you can see how empty this roadmap is now. And we had to completely, so the model of doing country deployments has collapsed this year. And we had to move to a completely different model where we focus on creating resources, creating content that can be used remotely by our partners. So there are 4 main products that we worked on. So the first is a video. It's an HLP video, it's an animation video that's accessible to everybody. It's focused on shelter actors. and it was done in 7 different languages. It's available online. I'm going to post a link to the video on the chat later on. We also produced country profiles, which are those HLP country profiles that have been that started with IFRC in 2018. We produced 6 of them for Nigeria, Ethiopia, Mozambique, South Sudan, Burundi, and Niger. These 2 last ones we did it in French as well. CARE also did 3 of them in this past year, so Lebanon, Turkey, and Jordan. So we have 9 in total new HLP profiles this year that were produced. We're also working on mobile guides on HLP and a mini HLP field manual. Then these 2 products are still ongoing and will be launched probably before December, sometime before December. And we focus on remote support to the countries that requested support, as I was working with the community, the global community of practice on HLP, and participating in the different webinars and forums, etc. But I think that the most tangible work is the one that I'm showing now in this slide. And hopefully we can resume deployments. I do think there's a lot of value in country deployments where you get to speak directly to government officials, go to the field and have meaningful conversations that you don't have, that's very difficult to have online. So I hope we can resume those soon, but for now we're going to have also to find new ways of supporting the country shelter clusters. So this is my update. I'm going to now shift to the country presentations with the theme Secure Enough, and we're going to start with Iraq with Dana Swenson from NRC Iraq. Dana, your updates.
Great, hang on. Sorry.
Hi, Dana.
Sorry, I'm in the field and my internet is accordingly terrible. If Barry, would you like to start with the next country program, and hopefully I'll be better by then.
Yeah, we can do that. No problem. Although we can hear you loud and clear. But let's start with Danyacho. Are you ready with your presentation? Can you do yours first?
Yes, I can do the presentation.
All right, thank you, Danyacho. So we're going to start then with Ethiopia. Danyacho Shibru, who is IOM HLP officer in Ethiopia, has done a lot of work on securing tenure for the shelter program there. So it's with you, Danyacho.
Okay, thank you, Ibere, and thank you, the team. I'm going to do my presentation on what is secure enough in the context of Ethiopia. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see, Danyacho.
Thank you. I will start with some background information about Ethiopia and the HLP support we are providing. Ethiopia is, as you know, one of the federal states where there are about 10 regional states. which are autonomous in almost everything, including administering their land and property. And land belongs to the state in the context of Ethiopia, and the people have only use rights. That means they have granted only the use right to the land they are owning. Therefore, whenever I say landowner, I'm referring to the use right that the individuals are having on their parcel. And the other thing is, in terms of all dynamics in the country, including the social, economic, and political issues, land is the epicenter of all these things. So every change that comes in the country is mainly focusing and emanating from land. Therefore, land tenure security system is a very crucial issue in Ethiopia. But something very important is land tenure security system is administered in so many different systems in the country, which means there is a lot of plurality in land administration system, and which is different from one region to the other, and at the same time which is a little bit different from urban to the rural areas. The country has a lot of land certification systems that has a long history, and she has gone through providing first level land certificates, and this land certification has had its own drawbacks and shortcomings, and to overcome this, a lot of investment has been made to do the second level land certification, which is improving some of the drawbacks of the previous one. However, there is a serious lack of universality in covering large parts of the country. Even within a region itself, there is some discrepancy. It has been focusing only the farming areas of the farmers, which means only a small proportion out of the total is certified. And this has led into encroachment of land, and this encroachment sometimes grow up into the land grabbing, where the surrounding farmers are moving into the uncertified land to get more land. And this situation gradually lead into dispute between individuals, and sometimes it grow up into ethnic or clan conflict. And this has moved or lead into displacement of hundreds and thousands of people. This is particularly true in the areas where there is a boundary dispute and there is no clear demarcation between two or more adjacent regions. And accordingly, this has, forced the government to do some peace talks and negotiation between the clans who were involved into conflict for land, and the resettlement and rehabilitation process has been started. In the due course, IOM and other humanitarian partners has been, asked for support to support the efforts of government. In the meantime, IOM has different types of land tenure security document verification tools, and some of these tools are consolidated ones with the help and advice of HLP shelter cluster at national level, and IOM has also developed its own HLP verification tools, which are actually cascaded and detailed from the shelter cluster consolidated tools. And accordingly, some of the most important operations we were doing in terms of HLP support, where majority of them are in emergency response areas. And in this emergency response, the most important procedures we go through are assessing the legal provisions which are at national level and at regional level. And after doing that legal provision assessment, we also do some HLP specific assessment in the response areas, in the emergency response areas. And we also do some analysis of conditions before displacement, who were living where and what type of tenure they used to have before displacement and before the incidence of this conflict and displacement. And we also do some due diligence in terms of land tenure security document verification. And based on all these sources of information, we can come up with some outcomes, and based on that findings, we do some kinds of awareness creation, capacity building, counseling, guidance, case support, wherever it is necessary. And I can mention the Gedio-Guji response areas, the Benishangul Gumuz and Somali emergency response areas that we have widely done our activities. And these are some of the pictures that we come across while verifying the tenure security document. Like I told you earlier, there is no uniformity in tenure security document. Some areas are having only the green book or the so-called first level land certificate, and the others have the second level land certificate, and the others have only the taxation bills they paid for use rights they have on the land. And there are also a lot, or I can say large number of beneficiaries that does not have any kinds of tenure security document. Anyway, based on the context, we try to identify which type of tenure is the most secure one that can protect the beneficiaries from any type of forced eviction anytime soon. Accordingly, the first thing we go and check is whether they have any type of paper-based tenure security document. And most of the time, what we found is this, the second picture, this one, which is a taxation bill they paid for the government. And this is the minimum requirement we can consider for advising the shelter colleagues to proceed with the shelter construction. And if the beneficiary has more secured tenure, at least they can have this one, which is this first level land certificate. And the most secured, in quotation, we have found is the second level land certificate, where every landowner has been issued a certificate of land entitlement for every single parcel of land. If any of these paper documents are not found, we have developed our own templates, which is the first one in the picture to the left side, and it says it indicates the region, the woreda, the zone, the Kabale administration, and the name of the owners, and if there are, the name of the co-owners, if it is jointly owned by more than one individual, and the GPS reading of that specific land, and we corroborate this, or we request the surrounding neighborhoods to testify that the person is having some kinds of ownership before the incidence of conflict and before the displacement. Therefore, we do all these types of tenure verification. And regarding what is secure enough tenure in Ethiopia, I mean, there is a big variation from place to place. Even within a region itself, there is a big difference between urban areas and rural areas. I mean, in urban areas, land certification is more or less very good compared to the rural areas. But in rural areas, there is a big diverse and plurality of land tenure security issues. And generally, what I can say is, as you go from left to right, the level of tenure security gets increasing. If you consider this triangle as a, scale of secure enough, and if you go from left to right, the security of tenure is increasing. But on the reverse way, this is a minimum requirement. As a shelter cluster, we discussed and agreed to have this statement of collaboration by the surrounding neighborhoods and the local authorities to just confirm or give us a consent that he was the regular resident of that particular area and he used to have a use right over the land and property he is claiming after the displacement. Therefore, this is, a kind of pictorial representation for the secure enough in the country. But sometimes, if we are lucky enough, we can find a single beneficiary having all kinds of tenure security document that can ease our due diligence and verification of tenure security document. But there were a lot of challenges. For example, if we consider the first one, there is poor registration of land transaction. As you know, land information is one of the most, dynamic type of information, because if, for example, I'm the owner of one piece of land, I won't be the owner forever. I may pass it to my sons or daughters through a gift or through inheritance, and that type of land information is not regularly registered and updated. This was one of the serious problems we encountered. And the other one is land and property swapping. This is particularly true in conflict-prone areas, like, for example, Gedio and Guji areas, and where the Gujis who were living in Gedio area before displacement were not interested to go back to their place of origin, and they preferred to stay where they flee as an IDP, and the vice versa is true. In this time, they prefer to swap or exchange their land and other properties, but according to the regional and the federal land administration and property proclamations, especially across regions, it is not easy to swap this land and property. This was a very difficult and challenging one. The other one was the polygamous marriage. One man married to 2 or more women, and in all his land and property, only his name is registered as an owner. And it's illegal in a family law of the federal level or the regional level, except those regions who are using the Sharia law for their family law. It's illegal to get married to more than 1 woman. In this case, it is very difficult to administer and register land security and tenure documentation. The other thing is the secondary occupancy, which actually was a serious one, but due to the serious engagement of local authorities, community elders, and other religious leaders, this has been more or less solved in almost response areas, except very few reports. And the other thing is loss of ownership documentation. This has been also worked on seriously in collaboration with the local authorities so that the beneficiaries can get a replacement document for the document, tenure security documents they have lost during the conflict. Homeless IDPs were also recorded in some emergency response areas, and local authorities were also willing to provide a piece of land which were communally owned in their respective qabalis, and this land was used for shelter construction. Land encroachment and grabbing was still an existing problem, especially in areas where the land is owned by a community jointly owned by the large number of communities, or if it is state-owned land. And this is, we are encouraging the local authorities to do land regularization and land registration. And lack of updated land registry system and civil documentation is also another challenging problem in most of the response areas, and document restoration is what we are encouraging and supporting the local land administration authorities. The other, and maybe the last one, is lack of capacity and technical skills to provide tenure security document. Based on the awareness creation we do in different levels, and based on the capacity building activities we do, people have, especially the IDPs, have started to query for getting one tenure security document, but the experts at Warada level, especially in the land administration authority, are either incapable or they lack some technical skill to provide the document. But we are also still working with the government in all the emergency response areas. These are what I want to say for now. If you have any question, and you are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniacho. Thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to see if Dana is ready for her presentation on Iraq. Dana?
I think the internet's cooperating.
Great.
Let's try it while it's... All right. Can you see?
Not yet, but maybe soon. Yeah, we can see it.
Oh, you can. Okay, great. All right. I'm going to share about the Iraq context. So as a quick overview of the Iraq context, between 2014 and 2017, Iraq was engaged with a conflict with the Islamic State group. There was widespread destruction, which included significant destruction of the housing stock. About 138,000 houses were destroyed, half of which were beyond repair, which left 400,000 people affected, and another 4 million people in need of shelter assistance. Between 2019 and 2020, the context really shifted from emergency and immediate post-emergency into returns to areas of origin. And you'll see why that's significant to the shelter interventions and the associated due diligence concerns. And in 2021, 4 million returns are expected, although there are still camps and IDPs that are secondarily displaced throughout the country. I just want to frame this a bit with an overview of NRC's shelter programming. From 2015 to 2017, the intervention was very focused on emergency tenancy solutions, so occupancy free of charge, rent reduced shelter, cash for rent. Those incur significant HLP issues because of the tenancy component, and so they required a lot of legal support. Beginning in 2018, as I mentioned in the last slide, there was a significant shift from IDPs to returnees. And in 2019 and 2020, and looking forward into 2021, there's been a shift to rehabilitation of returnee properties, such as this one that I've included here from Anbar in southern Iraq. Those have fewer complex HLP issues because it's people returning to property that they owned themselves, and fewer tenancy and use arrangements, which means there doesn't need to be as much legal support to unwind ownership issues. The reconstruction of war-damaged houses has focused on two modalities. One is owner-led. That's the preferred modality because it is more efficient, at least in theory, where the owner receives cash in tranches to upgrade the property themselves, and it's monitored by NRC. The other is a contractor modality where the owner is unable or unwilling to upgrade on their own, and so a contractor is contracted by NRC to do the works. The average value in Iraq is $2,000 per household, which is a fairly large number. But all of this means that it's relatively straightforward to achieve a good enough, quote unquote, standard, especially with the first modality, which is where the owner is upgrading their own property. We don't have to be quite as involved in the potential outcomes. We're mostly involved in the beginning. And then just to give a quick overview of the kind of legal support that it has been provided and is being provided at NRC in Iraq. Previously, as I mentioned, there was heavy legal support around the occupancy free of charge and the rent reduced shelter and the cash for shelter arrangements because of the tenancy component and because it was a temporary arrangement on somebody else's land, which is very likely to generate conflicts or extortion or unequal tenant-landlord relationships. With the shift to rehabilitation of returnee property, this is actually now largely handled by shelter themselves. And so there's only legal support around complex cases, which would include compensation claims. In Iraq, there is, at least in theory, a government-funded compensation scheme for properties that were damaged during the conflict. The catch being that if you repair your property, the property itself is the evidence that you require compensation. So repair of the property destroys the evidence and you typically can't make a claim. It's also been very delayed. Legal support is also required if there's informal tenure arrangements. So maybe where the actual owner of the house is either dead or missing, but family members wish to return and reclaim that property and repair it. And then cases where ownership or use arrangements are unclear, but they're not disqualifying. And I'll speak a little bit about what disqualifying would look like in a moment. But so in short, at least for NRC in the Iraq context, but I think that this is generally true across the board, it's the HLP issues have become simpler with the returns context. So very similar to Ethiopia, a due diligence assessment in Iraq, and probably in most contexts like this, is initially looking at, for the official proof of ownership in Iraq, that would be a tapu, which is a government use deed, similar to Ethiopia. Everybody is just using government land. If there's no tapu, then we look to supporting documentation such as a water bill, electricity bill, a tax bill. The reach of the state is extensive in Iraq, so typically you can find evidence of some kind of interaction with the state over use. Attestation of community leaders, either government appointed like a sheikh or community appointed like a mukhtar, and then witness statements from non-familial community members. Reasons that a due diligence assessment might fail in Iraq would be if the individual doesn't have supporting documents, if there isn't concurrence amongst key community members, such as the mukhtar sheikh and non-relative witnesses about use or ownership rights. And also, notably in Iraq, community tensions around perceived IS affiliation. That has been a massive component of the aftermath of the conflict, and it really is basically part of every part of humanitarian interventions here, because there is such wide suspicion of people that were displaced and people that are returning from camps that they might be IS affiliated. So there's a lot of community tension around that. There were also significant sectarian tensions in Iraq that predated the conflict with IS. And so where that overlaps with secondary occupation, it can be impossible to intervene in an ethical way without causing additional risks. And then finally, and this is not an uncommon problem, is where a missing person certificate has not been obtained for the registered owner. If family members or other people want to return and use the property, and they might have a legitimate claim, if there is no missing persons certificate, it doesn't always fail, but it makes it significantly more complicated to become involved. And so then I just want to conclude this by asking sort of what does good enough mean in Iraq? As I have said in the other slides, the returnee context now includes far fewer complex HLP cases. That doesn't mean that they don't exist or that there's not a value add to doing thorough due diligence, but it does mean that it's easier to meet a sort of good enough standard than it was when we were doing a lot of tenancy work. So the three areas that to look at are that it meets community expectations, that it doesn't inflame existing sectarian tensions, as described in the last slide. It matches community use expectations about how they think the land should be used. It meets protection and rights-based standards. A challenge for humanitarian actors in Iraq is, of course, we're not going to deny services to people on the basis of perceived affiliation, IS affiliation, but it does run the risk of inflaming community tensions in really potentially damaging and dangerous ways. So we have to be cautious of it nonetheless. And then finally, considering women's HLP rights, particularly in a post-conflict setting where the male head of household might well be dead, missing, or detained on the basis of bias affiliation. And then finally, that it meets NRC and donor standards, which should overlap also with community expectations and protection standards, but that the person that we're upgrading the shelter for is likely that they will probably be the user of the shelter, and that also that we're minimizing the risk of future conflict over a resource that will become more valuable. And that is the end.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you so much. These are excellent criteria for what's secure enough. I think we should discuss a little bit more about that later. Rhoda, are you ready with your Nigeria presentation?
Yes, I am, Lopez.
All right, the floor is yours.
All right. All right, good day, everyone. I'll be making a short presentation on the HLP program here in Nigeria. First, I'll be focusing on the general HLP program, and then I will concentrate on IOM response here in Northeast Nigeria. Well, this is a map of Nigeria showing the most affected areas by the conflict. The context of Nigeria is that since 2009, there's been an armed conflict that has led to displacement of millions of people into the urban centers. So currently we have over 2 million of people living within host communities, informal settlements, and with others living in formal camps. Well, this is the map of the Northeast Nigeria, but Borno State has the largest number of IDPs and the most affected state in the Northeast. Just like the other presenters have mentioned, the Nigerian context isn't very much different. We have mostly, like I said, the IDPs living within host communities, having rental arrangements, where the few that have a good means of livelihood are able to go into some arrangements within the community where they pay rent periodically, either in cash or in kind. And then others are living in informal settlements on open lands as squatters, whether legally or illegally. And then the others are living within formal camps, which are mostly lands owned by the government. And it was worthy of mentioning at this point that lands in Nigeria, just like Ethiopia, belongs to the government. So private individuals only acquire the rights of use. So what you have is a right of use as a private individual, but the land remains under the ownership of the state. So based on the general HLP program here in Borno State, we have encountered a lot of HLP issues. Some of them include access to land. Due to the protractedness of the conflict, land has become more and more scarce over time, since most programs are ravaging for the available lands for both livelihood programs, WASH components of humanitarian response, and mostly shelter. And since most IDPs are living within trenches in the host community, available lands, especially public lands, have become far more scarce than it has been ever. And most organizations are now moving towards utilization of private lands, that's lands owned by private individuals who have acquired the rights of use from government. And I tell you, it has resulted in a lot of issues. Also, the trend we are noticing now is forced eviction. This is as a result of tenants' inability to pay rent over time, and also in situations of deep field locations, we have IDPs returning to their original place of displacement, having others already in occupation of their lands, either as squatters or secondary occupants, and these people are being evicted from occupation, some of them without alternative provision of shelter. Also, we have limited land documentation. A recent assessment by the state of Borno has shown that 75% of lands within the urban centers are unregistered. So if lands within urban centers are unregistered, imagine the lands within the local government. Also, we have inefficient land administration system. Due to the conflict, most of the government structures have been affected. So we have most of the local government areas still yet to return to normalcy. So government as a structure mostly exists only within the urban centers, especially the headquarters of Borno State, which is Maiduguri town. And also we have experienced increasing HLP disputes, mostly ranging from multiple ownership claims to private lands, and also issues of boundary disputes, issues of illegal squatters being evicted, and the likes. Now, for what is secure enough, humanitarian agencies here in Borno State have adopted basic different types of programs to ensure that the rights of people to adequate shelter and prevention of eviction has been protected. And some of the programs that are being implemented currently by agencies includes the Cash for Rent program, mostly run by the NRC here. So what the Cash for Rent program does is that it targets IDPs mostly living within the host communities and vulnerable members of the community, where they are provided with cash to pay for their rent. So this program seeks to prevent forced eviction and secondary displacement, and it also seeks to improve means of livelihood of these tenants so that without them focusing so much on paying of rent, they focus on feeding their family and sustaining their standard of living. Another type of program the agencies have adopted is the shelter repair in lieu of rent. So what this program does is it targets IDPs also living within host communities and also vulnerable members of the community. So this type of program particularly is unique because it targets both tenants and landlords directly, whereby the landlord, with his consent, allows humanitarian organizations to provide upgrade for the shelters that are occupied by IDPs in rental arrangements or vulnerable members of the community who are within those communities which are not displaced. So what the organization does is it provides upgrade to the shelters, like providing of windows, doors, mending of leaking roofs, plastering of cracked walls, and the likes. So here, at the end of the day, the upgrade belongs to the landlord. He has his shelter upgraded, and for an agreed period of time ranging from 2 to 3 years, the tenants gets to stay rent-free for this period, after which the property will revert back to the owner, and upon agreement they can decide to continue on the rental arrangements periodically as they may agree. Now, the cost of repair usually exceeds the amount of rent that is usually collected. So yeah, the landlord gets to have an upgrade that is far more than the value of rent he would have collected within this 2 or 3 years. So this program is aimed at improving the habitable standards of housing and also protection of forced eviction and secondary displacement. It also improves the standard of living by improving means of livelihood for IDPs and vulnerable people living within the host community. This is, of course, because they get to stay rent-free. Now, the last method adopted for secure enough is the due diligence for land use and documentations. I'm going to focus on the IOM approach here in Borno State. Usually, like I said, we utilize public lands because most of IDPs living within formal camps are on government-owned lands or properties like schools and the likes. So usually, all of IOM's approval for land use comes directly from the State Emergency Management Agency, which is called the SEMA. Now, IOM coordinates with SEMA through the shelter cluster, shelter and CCCM cluster, to get all approvals for land use. It usually comes in a documented form where the agency would request for the intervention of IOM upon any particular land, stating the nature of the project it hopes that IOM would implement. So what IOM usually does is to make sure that all of the programs it intends to implement on this land is captured on the agreement. Sorry, I do not have a sample of that agreement to project here. So when it is public land where it is under the administration of the state or it is under the administration of the local government area, we usually seek for an approval, like I said, which is written. So they provide it for us with a consent for use by the local government authority, that is where the land is located within the local government areas. The local government council will have to give a written approval for IOM to use. So that is the minimum standard for secure enough for the using of public lands. But where, however, it is a private land, like I said, due to the protraction of the conflict, more and more demand for land has increased, and it has led to organizations utilizing of private lands. So most available lands within these areas are now private lands. So as a minimum standard, IOM has developed that where a private land is to be utilized for any of its program, the CCCM, in collaboration with the emergency response team on ground, must carry some form of identification of the landowner. So with the help of the local authorities, that is the traditional and community leaders, the actual owner of a particular land that is identified that is suitable for the particular program IOM seeks to implement will be met, and then we negotiate for access for land use. So upon negotiation, where that approval is granted, the landowner will write it down, will document it, and the community leader will sign as a witness to that arrangement. So we will then notify the SEMA, which is the state agency for all of approvals, seeking for their approval to go ahead to use this land for the program intended. Now, ideally, SEMA is supposed to be the one pioneering this arrangement, but like I said, most of the government structure has been undermined due to the conflict. They have remained primary targets till date, so most of these structures are non-existent in the local government areas. So IOM supports in facilitating this arrangement. So where the consent of the private landowner is sought and obtained, we document it and then inform SEMA that we have sought and obtained the consent, and they will in turn grant us approval. We do this to prevent possible conflicts that might arise or dispute that might arise as to the land use. And over time, we have seen the community leaders playing a very key role in dispute resolution over some of these disputes. So also SEMA have also played a key role in settlement of some of the disputes that might likely arise in situations of public lands. We have cases where IDPs are supposed to be relocated because the government is embarking on construction of shelter programs for returnees in a certain location. And with the help of SEMA and the local government authority, we're able to arrange, which is still ongoing, an alternative shelter accommodations for these people. So this is the barest minimum standard that IOM adheres to for the implementation of its shelter program and other program that has land use at its core center. Now, the program generally, like I said, it aims at supporting IDPs in informal settlements. It's also aimed at reducing the risk of evictions and conflict. It also aims at protecting the rights of landowners and tenants, which is mostly often neglected, the rights of landowners in most humanitarian responses. And then we also seek to improve housing to habitable standards. We have encountered some challenges ranging from the availability of land for humanitarian programs, the protraction of the conflict, the insecurity has made return almost impossible, and thereby making land inaccessible and the likes. So, and also we have fewer HLP actors. In Borno State specifically, currently we have less than 4 humanitarian agencies that are into HLP program. And then the multiple land tenure systems in Nigeria has played a key role in making the work even more and more challenging over time. Thank you very much. With this, I've come to the end of my presentation. Lopez, over to you.
Thank you, Rhoda. I think we have 1 or 2 minutes for the Q&A. If anyone has a question, just ask directly the participants. I have a quick question for Dana. You mentioned that as part of the criteria for what's secure enough and what you try to achieve in terms of tenure security, your criteria has to match with what with the donor requirements. Have you ever encountered any instance or example where the donor requirements did not match your criteria?
No, I mean, so occasionally we have a donor right now that has asked us to vet beneficiaries before we do shelter upgrades, and that's not something that we like to do. But I think that's really the only instance.
Yeah, no, it's good. That's good. That's good news. Because in the past, donors have been very stringent on the requirements for the tenure requirements for providing shelter and repairs. But now I think the requirements are matching what the field operators demand or come up with. Any other questions for the participants before we wrap up? It's already 5 p.m. I don't see any in the chat. Alex has one. Alex, go ahead. Just ask directly.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for the amazing presentations. It's a question for any of the panelists who wish to answer, but what kind of mechanisms do you have in place to monitor whether tenure arrangements are being respected?
I wish our methods for monitoring tenure arrangements were better and more formalized. In theory, shelter teams do checks after the shelter's been handed over, but I don't actually believe that we have, in full honesty, I'm not sure that we actually have a real system.
Okay, here in Nigeria, some of the methods adopted for monitoring compliance includes training of beneficiaries, the landlord and the tenants, on the basic terms and conditions of the program. So the documented agreement contains all the various rights and obligations of the parties to it. And then also another training for the community leaders is carried out to provide support in case of disputes arising. Also, some agencies have some form of feedback mechanism, like hotline, which is toll-free hotline for complaints and resolution of disputes. But like I said, here in this context, Nigeria, the community leaders are primarily saddled with the responsibility of dispute resolution. So with the additional HLP training and CDR, collaborative dispute resolution mechanism, the skill of the community leaders is improved to provide support in cases of disputes. And also where they fail, the organization itself through its HLP staff go in to provide some dispute. And also there is some form of direct monitoring on some periodic field visits on some of the tenants to see how they are doing, if they're still in occupation of the property and the likes. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhoda. I have a last question here before we wrap up from David Delgado. It's a follow-up for Dana. And his question relates to the QIC requirements, know your customer and not funding terrorism when you do interventions with cash. So how do you, if you're not doing vetting, how do you make sure that you comply with those QIC and not funding terrorism requirements?
Yes. Sorry to cut in, but it's more to do with if you're using a financial service provider, are they effectively vetting even if you're saying that your program is not vetting?
So in Iraq, we use hawalas, which I doubt would have the capacity to do vetting. We actually are not doing very much cash programming around shelter. We do multi-purpose cash assistance. And I could not speak to whether or not they do vetting for that, unfortunately.
Thank you.
All right. I think we have to wrap up now, but thank you everyone for the presentations.
Yes.
Yes,
and also,
tell me.
Yes, so just before we close, I'm posting in the chat the feedback form for this session. So if I could ask everybody to fill that out, it helps us, of course, to get good feedback on how it's working online this year in this COVID pandemic. But thank you, everybody. Very interesting presentations and well done.
Thank you all.